Okay, let's assume you've created that USB boot disk and it's ready to install Ubuntu. Now, where do you want to install it? That's a good question. You can see what's on the disk there. Anyway, when you boot to it, you'll find it's got two options. Trying Ubuntu, which is perfectly fine. You can just run it off of that USB, or you can install Ubuntu. What I want to do is install it on a separate USB. Now, in choosing that, first thing it's going to find is your wireless internet, and it's going to ask you to connect to that if you can, because it wants to do any updates that are necessary. Now, we're going to do a demo and full installation, and this is where it says things like downloading your updates and installing third-party software. Those are things you might have to do during the installation. So it says, this computer currently has Windows 7 on it. What would you like to do? We don't want to leave, I don't necessarily want it on both of them. What I actually want to do is something else. I want to create a USB that has the Linux on it. Now, the hard disk is known as SDA, and it may have some logical partitions in there. And then SDC, in my example here, is the USB. I have 128 gigabyte USB. So that's where I'm going to want to change that and set that up. Now, I'm going to use a file system called ext4. That's the current Linux operating system or file system. It used to be ext3 back in the old days, and of course you might recognize FAT16, FAT32, NTFS, and so on. So once I've set that up, I can continue. I'm only going to set up 120 of the gigabytes for this disk because I want to set up the other 8 remaining as a swap space. So you'll see at this point I have free space 8,000 megabytes, or in other words 8 gigabytes. Sometimes we need swap space. It's essentially, think of it almost as RAM for the that doesn't fit in RAM, so we have it for on the hard drive. So it's kind of set up that way there. And you do the same thing. You take that free space, and we're just going to set it up as a logical partition with swap space as its type. Now, there is a concern here. If you're installing this and it asks to make any changes to the SDA, then you got a problem, because that's your hard disk of the computer, and that will destroy the master boot record of that hard disk. You notice it's only partitioning the USB down below, but it does want to make changes there, and we can't allow that. Now, once we've gone through and installed, you will see that it'll ask you questions like, where in the world are you? It thinks it knows that we're in the Eastern time zone, and it figures we want US English. You'll have to set up a super user. That'll be yourself. I'm going to recommend that your username be your first name and your password be your last name, with perhaps a little something to make sure it's a good password, just some simple changes to it, whatever. But at that point, it'll go through and you'll see the installing system icons down there that it's setting up for Ubuntu to boot off your USB.